What if I told you that before Bigfoot, Native Americans spoke of giants that walked America's wilderness? These weren't mere tall tales, but warnings passed down as survival knowledge. The Algonquin feared skeletal windigos born from winter starvation. Plains tribes told of stone giants whose skin shattered arrows. Desert peoples battled red-haired cannibals in caves. From east to west, these enormous predators left footprints wide as shields in the soil of memory. Though driven back by fire and unity, they never truly vanished. Modern Sasquatch stories? Just the latest mask worn by figures who've haunted this land since before recorded time. The forest does not sleep. Even in the hush of midnight, when the campfire sinks to embers and the hunter's breathing softens into dream, the trees remain awake. They lean and listen, their bark stretched taut over secrets older than the rivers. Somewhere between the trunks, a shadow bends the branches down, heavier than bear, slower than elk. The sound it makes is not the breaking of wood, but the bending of memory. Something vast, returning to walk where it once ruled. The land remembers. Long before white sails cut across the Atlantic, before the hoofbeats of horses thundered through new valleys, before maps carved grids into wilderness, the first peoples told of shapes too large for daylight. They spoke of beings who towered above the tallest hunter, whose hunger could empty villages, whose steps left hollows in the earth that filled with rain and lasted for seasons. These were not metaphors, not symbols. They were monsters whose teeth tore flesh, whose hands could lift a man like a doll, whose eyes shone in firelight with an appetite that never dimmed. Around the fires, the stories began not as entertainment, but as warning. Grandmothers leaned close, their voices trembling against the wail of the wind. Do not wander when the snow thickens. Do not answer the cry from the tree line. Do not follow the sound of branches breaking, for it is not the storm, not the wind, it is them. Each nation had its name, each tongue carved a different syllable from fear. Yet beneath the difference beat the same pulse. There were giants, and they were hungry. The Algonquin spoke of a creature born when famine swallowed a soul. When the belly groaned too long and the mind cracked like ice, a human could warp into something terrible. Elongated, skeletal, yet vast as a tree, the heart hollowed by starvation. It was said, the more it ate, the taller it grew. Never satisfied, never sated. In the hush of winter, when snow smothered the land, people swore they could hear it pacing the ridges, its joints creaking like frozen pines, its breath whistling cold across the drifts. Far to the west, others told of giants with skins like stone. Arrows clattered harmless against their bodies, spears shattered on their hides. They strode down into valleys and scattered tribes like cattle, their laughter a sound like boulders grinding together. Smoke from burning villages curled into the sky, but the giants walked on, unbothered, their feet sinking deep into the prairie mud. And in the desert, where heat peeled the air and sand hissed underfoot, whispers told of red-haired cannibals. They emerged from caves at twilight, hair like copper flames, teeth slick with blood. They raided camps, dragged off children, gnawed bones until marrow wept. Tribes banded together to drive them back into their lairs, yet the memory lingered that in those caverns, fire once smothered giants alive, and the smell of their roasting flesh stained the stone forever. Everywhere, north, south, east, west, the pattern was the same, a continent scattered with colossal shadows, a land haunted not by gods, but by predators so human-shaped that they mocked man's own form. The footprints were always too large. Hunters stumbled upon them at dawn. Imprints sunk deep in soil, wide as shields, toes like river stones. Sometimes the tracks led to the edge of a lake, and there they stopped, as though the giant had melted into the water. Sometimes they circled a camp and vanished back into the forest, leaving the fire cold, the meat missing, the dogs too terrified to bark. The air of those nights was thick with dread. Children pressed their faces into mothers' laps. Men gripped their spears, though they knew the wood would snap like kindling against such foes. The night itself seemed swollen, too heavy, as if weighed down by unseen watchers. And always at the edge of hearing came the sound, slow, deliberate, crushing, footsteps too enormous to belong to man. The elders said the giants were older than the people. They were here before villages, before fires, before language itself. Some claimed they were children of the mountains, the ridge's own bones given flesh. Others whispered they were punishments, birthed when greed or cruelty split a human soul wide open. A man who hoarded meat while neighbors starved might feel his body stretch, his teeth lengthen, his hunger devour itself into something monstrous. By dawn, he would no longer be man but giant, cursed to feed forever and never be full. These were not bedtime stories. They were memory, heavy as stone. Even today, the earth hides their echoes. Valleys carry names that speak of enormous hunters. Caves are avoided, not because they are empty, but because they might not be. And in the hush of winter, when the wind gnaws at the cabin walls and the forest moans like a wounded beast, there are still those who hear the footsteps, the crunch, the pause, the silence before another step falls. The land remembers, and in its remembering, it warns. Night holds its breath. The embers on the lodge floor pulse and dim like the last red eyes of something watching from beneath the ash. Children pretend sleep because the old woman's voice moves like smoke, and no one wants her to stop. The wind drags its nails across the bark walls. Somewhere far out in the timber, a raven coughs, then goes quiet. She begins again, as if unspooling a net. Before the first house, before the first fence, before horses, the land belonged to the tall ones. Her hand lifts, thin as a fluttering leaf, and makes a small arc in the firelight. You can feel the map she draws. It begins where the lakes are dark and deep, where winter presses its blue mouth to the skin and sucks the warmth out. In that silence, she says, a hunter once followed a set of tracks that were not supposed to exist. He had strapped on his snowshoes before dawn, breathed steam into the bitter air, and set off after a deer that had ghosted into the birch stands. His own prints fell neatly, oval after oval, a twin ladder pressed into the crust. But the deer vanished as if swallowed by the cold itself. Then he saw them, not hoof marks, not the long drag of a wolf's belly through powder, not the neat triangles of foxes playing at vanishing. They were the prints of a foot like his, but impossibly larger, each step a basin, each toe a rounded stone, the stride so long that his own legs ached to imagine it. They crossed a clearing he had never trusted and went down into a gully where the birches leaned together like gossiping women. He could not help himself. He followed. The first thing he noticed was the way the forest listened. Birdsong thinned to threads and snapped. The trees drew in their breath and held it. Even the cold seemed to harden into glass. He kept on, foolish and brave, because men are always both when they are alone and armed. The gully deepened, his snowshoes hissed. He smelled something. Wet earth, musk, a sweetness like meat beginning to turn. At the bottom, where a creek ran under ice, the track stopped at the water's edge. He crouched and brushed the snow away from one print. Ice threads starred its edges, and in the center there was a smear of something dark, almost black in that light. He touched it. Grease. Old blood thinned to brown. A deer's hair caught in a frozen ripple. A second set of prints, smaller, stood inside the larger for 3 steps, then veered off into brush, as if something had been carried and then set aside, only long enough to adjust the burden. The hunter straightened slowly, his breath feathered. On the other side of the creek, the woods began again, close and gloomy, and in that pressed darkness, something shifted. It was like a shoulder turning, like a breath the size of a storm held and then released through hair. A weight moved and the snow faintly boomed under it. He could not see it, not the face, not the eyes, only the space it occupied, a human shape multiplied past reason. The smell of it was the smell of caves. It did not hurry, it did not hide, it simply was. And then, without sound, the forest let out its breath again, and the thing was gone. He did not speak for 2 days, they say. When he finally did, the words came out in rags. He would not go into the timber alone after that. He never ate the marrow first anymore. He left a portion at the edge of camp, on a stump where sap had dried like old tears. When children asked what it was for, he said only, "Manners." The old woman's hand lowers. The map the fire drew in the air fades, but not before it spreads westward, following the arc of mountains like the spine of something immense sleeping beneath the continent. Out there, the giants wear stone for skin. You can hear their weight in the way the rocks speak to one another. In those stories, it is summer when they come, thunder season. Heat sits on the shoulders and will not climb down. The men tell how they flint their arrowheads fine as the stingers of wasps, how they notch and bind until their fingers bleed, how they set the points to the bowstrings and watch them break against a chest that is more cliff than flesh. So the people learn other ways. How to make a pit look like ground. How to smear the scent of cooked fat across the mouth of it and stake meat in the center. How to wait, silent, heart stuttering against their ribs. When the giant steps, when the ground admits it, unwilling, the covering gives and the world slides. The first time the giant simply climbs out, laughing with a sound like iron striking iron. The second time, they line the pit with stakes and fire harden them until the tips gleam like teeth. When he falls again, when the laughter turns to iron torn and warped, the sky ripens with smoke and the women do not look away. From the deserts come other names. Red hair like flame, the old woman whispers. Red hair like rust. Red hair like sunset boiling. They live in caves that drink heat by day and breathe it out at night. The people learn the mouths of those caves like they learn the mouths of their children. The red-haired ones come thin seasons, when rabbits run light and the river speaks in a cracked voice. They move quickly, the sand keeping their secrets, and carry off the weakest first. The people begin to braid green branches tight, to lay thorn where bare feet pass, to lace fire across the cave's lip with sage and resin and a mother's fury. Smoke flows in, and the giants bellow, and the rock tastes ash until it is satisfied. Even now, the caves look down on you with an eyelid of stone, half closed against the memory. The story slides north again on its belly like a seal. It noses into the spruce forests, where the light is thin and green. There the tall ones wear different names. Some keep their distance, except in lean months. Some steal salmon, quick as hands reaching into a bucket. Some simply watch. The people there say you can feel them in your bones before you see them. Your knees know. Your scapula itches between its wings. The hair along your forearms lifts like wheat in a wind you almost can't feel. If you have manners, you speak politely into the trees. If you have no manners, you whistle, and something answers, a note lower than any you have in your body, a sound that moves through you like a slow river. Sometimes there is a trade. A shape will come to the edge of the clearing at dusk. It will not cross. It will wait while the people lay down fish heads, or the heel of a loaf, or the scraped hide of a deer folded just so. In the morning, the gifts are gone. In their place, river stones stacked like a child's careful game, spiraled fern fronds, a length of bark peeled and twisted into a figure 8. Once, a man found the foot-long femur of a hare standing upright in the center of a circle of crushed grass. He left it there. By noon, it was gone. Then come the winters that grind. Meat racks grow light, the women's faces hollow at the cheek. The men speak less. That is when the old words wake like animals and pace. They come in winter. They come when the belly hollows. Doors are barred. Fires are ringed with ash to make the room smell full. The bravest among the people go out and hang medicine in the trees, bones threaded with cedar bark, shells strung on sinew to rattle the way fear rattles in the chest. They paint the doorposts with soot and grease. They whisper the names they will not say aloud where children can hear. The old woman says, "It is not superstition to placate a shadow that leaves footprints." She tells of a night when the moon sat thin and white on the lip of the sky, and the dogs lay with their bellies flat to the ground, eyes glassy, tongues out and blue. Everything was too quiet. Even the lice on the bodies of men seemed to pause. Then it came. One step, and the lodge skins shuddered on their poles. Another step, and every pot in the village chattered a little against the packed earth. A third, closer, and the brush that had crept up while they slept rasped against the walls in one long breath. Children hid their faces. Mothers placed hands on small heads and pressed their own mouths to the crowns as if to share what heat they had left. No one moved. Outside, a slow exhale, a sightless looking in, like a hand feeling around a dark room for a familiar chair. The gift stump waited at the edge of the clearing. On it lay the last of the smoked fish. The step came again, softer, as if testing. The fish was taken. The breath went with it. In the morning, when they dared to look, the snow around the stump was printed with a circle of depressions as big as a man's chest, each filling with blue water that did not freeze all day. A man who has seen that does not need convincing. He needs rules. So the old woman teaches them the old etiquette. Do not whistle after the dark swallows the last rim of light. Do not laugh loudly at the edge of the woods unless you mean it as a challenge. Do not mock tracks, or step in them, or measure them as if the thing that made them were a trick in a traveling show. If you hunt and kill, leave a portion. If you feel watched, lower your eyes. The giants are not gods, she says, and do not want worship. They are older neighbors who keep their own counsel and their own paths, and who remember when your people were small and soft and easily carried. The fire has burned low. Her voice drops until it is almost a thread you have to lean forward to catch. Some say they are punishments given legs. Some say they are the land dreaming itself in a shape we can understand. Some say they are kin who stepped off the path and grew until the path broke under them. I say the land remembers and does not forget its first children, even when we do. She closes her eyes. The lodge seems to exhale with her, a soft collapsing of tension, as if the skin of the world has loosened one notch. Outside, the wind rises and trails away like a robe being pulled through dry grass. A log gives up and becomes coal. Sparks climb, startled, then die. You lie back on your blanket and stare at the roof, where smoke stains make maps of countries you will never see. Sleep will not come. When you finally do drift, it is the thin sleep of men waiting for a footfall. In your dream, you are standing at the edge of a lake whose surface is a perfect black mirror. Snow walks across it in small, disciplined steps, each flake a soldier with a dull white shield. You see the first print appear, no one there to make it, and then another, farther along, and another, as if something heavy but invisible is crossing toward the reeds. You wake with your mouth full of the taste of iron. The old woman is awake too. She is watching the door, where a thread of air slips in and touches the firelight, like a finger testing soup. She does not speak. Words feel showy now, too bright for the hour. She waits, and in her waiting, there is the knowledge of someone who has waited too many times to count. At first light, the frost makes a powder of the world. You step out. Your boot's first crunch is loud enough to shame you. The clearing is a dish set before the forest, and all the spoons have been licked. The gift stump is bare. On the far side, where the trees begin again and the light goes green and thin, the ground has been pressed and unpressed by something that carries weight with a careful grace. The prints go only a little way. Then the path turns to needles and fallen cones and the faint black velvet of old fire scars, and the story lifts its hem and goes where you cannot follow. It is always like this. The proof is a mouthful, a taste of grease, a single hair caught in a sliver of bark, a low vibration that might be wind and might be breath, enough to make lines on rock, enough to teach rules, not enough to end the story. At the river, ice plates drift and kiss, with sounds like thin porcelain tapping. You drink, the water so cold it hurts, and you see, under the shallows, a smooth stone with a groove cut through it, where something's heel has leaned too often. Upstream, a split willow is bound closed with strands of bark, twisted neatly in a way no storm does. Downriver, on a sandbar, 3 fish heads sit in a row like judges who have just risen to leave. They come in winter. They come when the belly hollows. The words are not a warning anymore. They are a cadence old as bone, a drum under everything. They do not explain. They make you ready. When the time is neither night nor day and the air smells like a stove just lit, you will hear the step that does not belong to any man you know. You will lift your head. You will not call out. You will remember to lower your eyes. The forest does not sleep. Even in summer, when heat hums in the needles and spiders string bridges from twig to twig, the giants move where the light is most patient. They trail after herds, not hunting, just watching, as if remembering a hunger they do not want back. They stand in fog so thick it makes skins of itself on their shoulders. They drink from the same river you do, cupping it with hands whose shadows swallow minnows whole. They keep to themselves mostly. They keep to the old ways, which are not our ways. And when they choose to cross our paths, it is not to be seen, but to be known, briefly, like a hand touching your back in a crowd, and then gone. By dusk the cold has teeth again. Smoke braids itself through alder and birch. The old woman's doorway shows a thin line of fire brighter than any star you will see tonight. You do not go in. You turn your boots toward the stump and lay down a slice of meat gone tough at the edges. Your hands shake and you tell yourself it is the cold. You step back, leave the small gift to the big old rules, and let the forest close itself behind you like a door you have promised not to open. The wind shifts. From the timber comes the slow, deliberate sound of a body the size of a story deciding where to place its weight. The land tilts to accept it. Somewhere under your feet, the memory of 1,000 such steps stirs like deep water waking to a pebble's fall. You do not look over your shoulder. You keep walking, as the old woman taught you, the cadence running in your chest like a second heartbeat. They come in winter. They come when the belly hollows. They come, and the land remembers. Winter does not arrive. It descends. It puts its full white hand on the land and presses until the bones complain. Smoke loses heart on the way out of the lodges and falls back in, a tired ghost. Breath turns to crystals, then to knives. The river tightens its jaw. In this sharpened quiet, hunger finds its voice, and the old words step forward like wolves you have always known were there. They say the tall hunger walks most boldly when the moon is a slice of bone, and the snow is a drum stretched tight. It is not born from storms, though storms clear a road for it. It is not born from night, though night is its best disguise. It is born, the old ones whisper, when a person chooses themselves over the camp again and again and again, until the choice takes on a body taller than any man can cast in shadow. A rib cage, like an empty rack, fingers like deer tines, teeth too many for a human mouth. It does not run. It does not pant. It glides with the patience of ice taking a lake. There is a boy who learns this the hard way. He is the last to sleep and the first to wake because he keeps the fire, and the fire is everything now. The woodpile is a dwindling spine beside the door. Every piece he feeds the coal sounds like a coin thrown into a well with no bottom. His mother has cut the meat thin and lied with her eyes, saying she is full. His sister pretends not to hear her belly speak in syllables of wind. The boy's father is gone, a small dark figure against the white days ago, hunting the places he said still remember him kindly. The boy watches the door as if watching might make a figure appear there, rhymed and shivering and grinning with news. At night, when the lodge sighs and sags and the sleepers turn in their blankets, the boy hears it for the first time. A step, not close, not far. He tells himself it is a tree letting go of its own weight, a sound timber makes when it is too tired to stand. But then it comes again, steady, unembarrassed, as if measuring out the world. He gathers the coals together until they look like eyes and feeds them a little more wood. The light crawls up the hide walls and stops at the smoke hole, trembling. Outside, a voice speaks, but not in words. It is the voice hunger uses when it has forgotten language. The boy tastes iron without bleeding. He reaches into the pouch by the fire for the beads his grandmother gave him, small dark seeds that smell of summer. He rubs them between his fingers, and the scent rises like a kindly ghost. But it cannot push back the other smell. The cold, old cave stink that slides under the door, as if it has always had a right to be here. The step draws a circle around the lodge and then pauses at the gift place. Every camp has one in winter, if it remembers its manners. A stump, or a flat stone, or a knot of roots where offerings are left when the nights grow long and the dreams grow teeth. The boy's family has nothing left to give that will not hurt them. He looks at the meat slicing on the rack, ragged as a torn ear. He looks at his sister's sleeping mouth. He takes the bowl with the broth at the bottom, the fat circling it like a thin ring on a bony finger. And he carries it to the door. Cold lays its hand on his face. The stars are too bright. It is always this way in the deepest freeze. The sky becomes a jealous thing, glittering and cruel. He steps out and sees his breath go up and then drop as if even air is too heavy to rise. He pours the broth at the stump. Steam leaps and dies. The smell jumps too, and something answers. Not a sound exactly, but a pressure change, as if the night had taken a breath that does not belong to weather. He backs away without turning his back, as the old woman taught him. The step comes again, closer now, careful, then stops. The boy hears lips he cannot see, drink what he offered, hears a tongue pull the last pearls of fat from the wood. The stump creaks softly. Snow settles. Then the night relaxes a fraction, and the boy is allowed to go back inside and pretend to sleep. In the morning, where the steam had risen, the snow has sunk into dark bowls the size of a man's chest. Inside, each is a faint lick of grease, a single hair the color of melted ice, and, most terrible, one pressed bead from the boy's grandmother, forced into the slush, as if to say, "I knew what you held in your fist. I wanted that more, but I will take this for now." This is how the understanding begins. Not with screams, not with blood flung across door lintels, with attention paid and attention returned. The boy grows quick in the ways that matter. He stops wasting words. He learns the sound of pride leaving a man like a breath released too fast. He learns the shape of footsteps that are not meant for human weight. He learns to leave portions without bitterness, because bitterness is a smell, and smells travel. And there are things in the forest who live by the nose. Some nights the hunger does not circle. It passes on the ridge, a shadow laid across a larger shadow, and the trees shudder a little when it brushes them with what might be an arm, and might be a memory of an arm. Some nights it comes to the river and lays its imprint there, heel deep, toes splayed, as if studying itself in the ice. Once, the boy follows at a distance, heart knocking in its box, and hides behind a fallen birch where mushrooms scallop like frozen tongues. He sees the shape then, not with his eyes. Those lie under starlight, but with the part of the body that names danger before sight can do its trick. Tall. Too tall. Its ribs countable, as if someone had strung a drum but forgotten to cover it with skin. Its shoulders heavy with a fur that does not look warm, only old. Its head cocks to one side the way a starving dog listens to a pot. It kneels at the river, and the ice groans under its attention. He hears it drink. He hears it sigh, a long wintering sound that ends in a tiny wet noise as a tongue gathers what it spilled. Then it stands and is gone, not quickly. Why hurry, when nothing out here can overtake you? But with the finality of a door closing. The boy's father returns on the 7th day, or the 9th, or a day that is only counted because he is suddenly there again. A dark knot in the bright door, carrying meat that shines blue in the cold. He is older by a decade for every mile he has walked. He lays the deer down and kneels by the coals and weeps into his hands, not because he is weak, but because something at his back walked with him the last mile and counted his bones. He dreamed a mouth bigger than any wound. He dreamed a hand that could fit over the whole of his head and squeeze until his thoughts turned to frost. He dreamed that the next step after his would not be his. They eat that day and the next. The boy's sister laughs too loudly, the way people laugh when they are afraid they will forget how, and the sound startles the birds out of a thorn tree. Only the boy eats like a thief, quick eyes, small bites, chewing with respect. He leaves a portion on the stump without being told, and he does it with his shoulders lowered, the way a man approaches a friend who may or may not be forgiving today. When his father asks him why, the boy and his mother do not answer. The boy only touches the beads in the pouch, lighter by one, and the mother only looks at the door, where the wind worries the hide, as if trying to teach it a new song. The hunger knows its name in every tongue and does not care. It wants heat and salt and the sweet shatter of marrow. It wants the soft fat behind the eyes. It wants and grows on wanting. In lean camps, it finds the greedy and stretches them until their skins are too small, until their voices thin to ice wire, until their hearts beat out of time with the living. In healthy camps, it stays outside the ring of light and counts breaths. It is patient, the way cold is patient, the way rivers are patient with rock. It will outlast you if you meet it with pride. If you meet it with ceremony, if you meet it with the old rules, it may pass by, leaving only a lesson pressed into the snow where your children will see it in the morning. One night, when the wind roars like a bear that has remembered what blood tastes like, the boy wakes to a different sound. Tapping, not woodpecker, not branch on roof. A knuckle, or something that remembers being a knuckle, rapping the way men do when they want to enter a door without scaring the children. 3 measured knocks, space between them like breath held. Then the scrape of something heavy shifting its opinion of the night. The boy sits up. He looks at his mother. She is already awake, her eyes reflecting the fire in 2 small bright beads. She puts a finger to her lips and lifts the bowl they keep under the bench for moments like this. The bowl she does not let herself look at often, because it always asks a question she does not want to answer. It holds a little fat, the last of it run from bones days ago, and the heel of something that used to be feast. The boy takes it. He feels the room tilt toward the door. He steps into the knives of the cold, and the stars slice him thin, and he does not make a sound. At the gift place, he sets the bowl down with 2 hands, as if offering a newborn. He whispers, not a prayer exactly, but a courtesy. The rime on the stump burns his fingers. He backs away. The night reaches forward. The shape takes the bowl. The boy hears clay sing a little under the pressure of that grip. He hears slopping, swallowing, a low, pleased noise, almost shy. The bowl comes back empty and cracked, set carefully where it had been, as if to say, I am not a thief. I am a hunger. These are different things. Inside, the boy's mother warms his hands between her palms. The wind rises and falls like a chest. The tapping does not come again. The door does not open. The fire breathes and settles. The boy sleeps at last, and in his sleep he walks through a white world where a second set of his own footprints appears beside him. Larger, always a pace ahead, never turning to look back. Snow thickens until it becomes not weather but law. It covers the roofs, smothers the trails, folds itself into the lungs until every breath feels borrowed. Hunger grows teeth. Firewood shrinks. Silence fattens. In this silence, the giants of famine move most easily, the ones the Algonquin know by a name that tastes like ice and marrow. The windigo does not hurry. It never needs to. Time itself thins around it. A week without meat, 2 weeks without fat. The stomach begins to eat its own lining. Dreams turn red at the edges. That is when its shape first presses against the edge of vision. Taller than the trees, ribs ringing like drums, mouth split wider than a wolf's. Those who see it do not always scream. Sometimes they only bow their heads because in their hearts they recognize the shape. It is theirs. It is what they would become if left too long in the white silence. One winter, so the elders tell, an entire camp vanished. Not burned, not raided, simply gone. Dogs were found curled into their own tails, frozen stiff, their eyes still wide as if they had seen too much. Meat racks stood empty, though the snow around them was trampled with prints too long, too deep. At the center of the village, the fires had been pulled apart, coals scattered as if by a careless hand. No blood, no bones. Only silence, so thick that even the crows would not break it. Travelers who passed that way later swore the air still tasted of iron. They did not camp there. They walked fast, though the snow punished every step, because they knew the windigo was still listening. Another tale, darker, circles the Great Lakes. It tells of a man who took more than his share in the hard months. He ate in secret, gnawed bones when others dreamed of broth. He grew thin, but not as thin as the rest, and the eyes of the camp turned toward him with questions he would not answer. Then came the night when screams split the snow's thick quilt. The people found him crouched over his brother's body, lips red to the jaw, fingers deep inside the chest as if rooting for the last ember of heat. He looked up, and in his eyes there was no shame, only a hollow light, white and endless. By dawn, his body had lengthened, joints swollen, skin stretched until it cracked like ice. He fled into the timber, moving on legs that no longer belonged to a man. The camp buried what was left of his brother and carved words into the trees to warn others. The windigo takes those who feed alone. In every story, fire is the only answer. Some say the giants are drawn to it, fascinated like moths to a dangerous star. Others say they fear it, that flame is the one thing that can cauterize the hunger. Hunters speak of carrying embers in clay pots, of drawing circles of ash around sleeping places. There are those who whisper of more terrible cures, binding a suspected man to a pole and opening his veins, letting the fire lick his blood so the hunger dies inside him. Few admit it, but more than one campfire has been fed with the flesh of its own to keep the windigo from feeding instead. There is an old refrain repeated in these nights, one that mothers whisper to children as much to steady themselves as to teach. The windigo walks where famine has been. The windigo waits when bellies are thin. The windigo grows with the food that it takes. The windigo never forgets its mistakes. The boy who once fed broth to the stump grows into a man under this shadow. He learns to read the cold as one reads a hostile face. He knows when the trees are too still, when the snow's surface is too smooth, when silence presses too close against the ears. He has seen the shape at the river. He has heard the knocking that is not a knock. He carries fire like a weapon now, coals swaddled in moss, sparks coaxed from stone with a reverence usually given to prayers. In his eyes, there is always the memory of steps circling in the night. The elders say this is how the windigo keeps balance. Not mercy, never mercy, but balance. It comes to remind men that greed becomes flesh, that hunger walks on two legs, that the winter outside is never as dangerous as the winter inside. They say each story of the windigo is a lesson etched into ice. Do not hoard, do not gorge, do not leave your kin to starve while you fatten. Because if you do, the land will remember, and the land will give that memory a body taller than any lodge and teeth sharper than any tool you have forged. On the coldest nights, when even the wolves are too wise to howl, you can still hear it, a step sinking deeper than a man's, a sigh that carries the weight of empty centuries, sometimes a knock on the door, polite as any guest, waiting to see what you will give. And if you give nothing, if you pretend not to hear, then perhaps you will wake to silence too complete, to a fire scattered, to snow heavy with footprints that lead away and never return. The windigo is not gone. It waits wherever hunger sharpens its claws. It waits wherever greed draws breath. And in the heart of every winter, when the belly hollows and the fire dims, the refrain rises again. The windigo walks where famine has been. The windigo waits when bellies are thin. The windigo grows with the food that it takes. The windigo never forgets its mistakes. On the prairie, nothing stays hidden. The grasses may ripple like a restless sea, but they never conceal. The sky is too broad, the land too bare, for silence to last long. Yet in that exposed expanse, stories linger of shapes immense, impossible to miss, descending upon villages as suddenly as storms from an empty sky. These were the stone-skinned giants whose bodies bore no wound, whose hides broke arrows as if they were no more than grass stalks snapping in the wind. The Sioux tell it straight. There were giants who walked the plains, and their flesh was stone. When their shadows fell, daylight itself seemed to falter. They were not quick, not cunning, but they were relentless, and nothing short of fire could move them to fall. Hunters carried stories the way they carried bows, retelling them so that children might know why some valleys were never settled, why some gullies lay abandoned. It begins in the evening, when the sun slides toward the rim of the earth and the horizon opens like a furnace door. A small band of hunters camps in the grass sea. They have built a fire, though the wind makes it waver like a candle in a breath. A buffalo hide stretches on stakes to dry, the meat smoking in thin strips, the dogs watching with eyes that glow red against the darkening sky. Then the earth stirs, not quake, not thunder. A heaviness, as though weight itself has remembered how to move. The hunters glance at one another. They do not speak. Speaking would admit they already know. First comes the shadow across the last orange light. Then the sound of something enormous shifting its bulk. A figure rises from the line where the earth kisses the sky, and as it draws near, the fire bends toward it, cowed. The hunters see the stone flesh glint, grey like flint, brown like river rock, veined with something that shines as though the giant's blood is ore. Their arrows are notched by instinct, but instinct cannot pierce granite. The first volley rattles uselessly off the giant's chest, falling to the dirt like autumn twigs. The giant does not even flinch. It laughs, a sound like boulders grinding together in a dry creek bed. The dogs yelp and bolt into the dark. The hunters fall back, eyes darting, desperate for a plan. One recalls the tale his grandfather whispered. Stone cannot bleed. Stone must break. He remembers fire. He remembers trickery. The Sioux call one such creature Iya, a devourer whose hunger was matched only by his invulnerability. He could swallow armies whole, some say, or blot out valleys with the mere span of his shoulders. In other stories, he wears many forms, always ruinous, always too much for any one warrior. But Stoneskin is his most terrible shape, the enemy who cannot be wounded by human hands. Around the Great Lakes, the Iroquois speak of Ganosqua, the stone giant. He is hunter, marauder, and eater of men. His body is plated in rock so thick that even the hardest flint tips shatter. He roams the forests and plains, his club heavy enough to splinter a man's chest with a single blow. He is not mindless. He stalks. He waits. His footsteps do not hurry because they do not need to. In some tales, he is tricked, led to fire, lured into snares, but never truly slain, only delayed, only driven back. In the dim firelight of the hunter's camp, the story and the moment fold into each other. The giant bends, the firelight glancing off his cheek as though off a cliff face, and he scoops up the drying buffalo hide. He crushes the meat in one fist and eats it raw, not pausing for sinew or bone. The hunters scatter. Some drop their bows, some fall to their knees. The giant's gaze is not cruel. It is worse. It is indifferent. To him, men are not prey or enemy, only noise, the way flies are to a wounded beast. When dawn comes, the hunters who survived crawl back into camp to find the earth pressed deep with prints wide as shields. Their fire is cold, their meat gone, their dogs vanished. The buffalo hide is nowhere. Only the smell of stone dust lingers, as though the creature shed part of its skin before it moved on. They gather the broken arrowheads, each fractured like glass, and carry them back to their people as proof. Stone does not bleed. Fire, only fire, will make it scream. The Crow, too, speak of stone giants who ruled before the people. They were cannibals, immense and cruel. They walked the high country, throwing down trees as if clearing space for their own feasts. It was said they grew so numerous that they hunted each other when humans grew scarce. Some whisper that it was this self-devouring that led to their end. Others say the tribes united, trapping them in gorges, setting fire to the dry grass until smoke and flame brought even stone to crack. The echoes of those screams, the elders say, still travel the plains on certain winds, disguised as the moan of rock in heat. There is a lesson in every retelling. The Sioux warn, arrogance is as dangerous as hunger. The Iroquois say, strength without heart becomes cruelty. The Crow remind, even stone can be undone by fire and cunning together. Each story, though cloaked in terror, bears the same root, a truth repeated until it beats like a second pulse in the listener's chest. The giants come not to teach, not to guide, but to remind you how fragile you are. And so, the plains remain haunted. Children hear the wind through canyon walls and swear it is stone flesh grinding. Hunters see strange cracks in boulders and imagine they were once ribs, once knees, once skulls shattered in final battle. At night, when the grass bends in long waves, it is easy to see a figure rising, massive, walking slowly but without pause, skin glinting like rock under moonlight. The land itself carries the weight of their passing. Hills shaped like shoulders, cliffs with faces half-formed, river gorges that look less carved by water than by footsteps too heavy for soil to bear. The tribes say the giants are gone, burned, broken, buried under cans of their own making. And yet, in the hush between gusts, in the pause between heartbeats, the prairie still seems to wait for a step heavy enough to remember itself. In the grasses, the wind whispers without end, a hushed and restless breath. But against the cliffs it groans, carrying the timbre of a living voice. The people learned to hear these moans as warnings. Stone still walks, the elders said. Do not forget, do not mock. The plains have long memories. One story tells of a village that made the mistake of forgetting. The hunters grew bold. They mocked the old tales, called them children's games, claimed the only giants that walked the earth now were buffalo. So they built their camp where no one should. On a ridge the old ones had left empty, a place whose very soil seemed veined with quartz. Nights were long, but they laughed through them. Fires burned bright. Drums rattled like 1,000 hooves. Then the ground shifted. At first they thought it was thunder, though the sky was clear. Then a shadow swallowed their fires. The ridge itself seemed to stand up, shaping into shoulders, into a head. The stone giant had come home. Arrows flew. They snapped, each one breaking like frost-split sticks. Spears clattered and rolled useless. The giant reached down and pulled men from the earth as easily as grass blades, crushing them with fingers that scraped sparks. Women screamed. Children fled. Those who survived swore they saw the giant's eyes glint like obsidian, cold and smooth. When the village burned, the giant walked on, leaving only pits where his feet had pressed. Grass grew black there for years. Another tale says, fire alone was not enough. Fire could crack stone, yes, but not break it. So the people learned to trick. They dug pits, deep as graves, and lined them with sharpened stakes hardened in flame. They covered them with branches, with soil, with snow, until the earth looked smooth again. Then they waited. The giants came, heavy and slow, their steps shaking the marrow of every man crouched in the dark. When the first giant fell, the sound was like mountains splitting. The air filled with dust, and the roar that followed was not of pain alone, but of insult. Stone, once proud, now humbled by sticks and flame. The Iroquois speak of one such giant who stumbled into the pit and screamed until his voice cracked rock along the riverbanks. The people circled with torches, their faces lit like masks of bone. They fed the fire with pine resin, with fat, with every dry branch they had carried for days. Smoke rose thick, and sparks leapt into the night like souls breaking free. The giant burned, his stone skin spitting fragments, his body cracking like pottery in the kiln. In the morning only shards remained, each heavier than any man could lift. They left them where they lay. To this day, the elders say, those stones hum if you press your ear against them in silence, but not all stone giants died. Some learned. Some grew clever. They would not walk into pits again. They would not be lured by meat tied to trees. They began to watch from the ridges, patient as time itself, waiting for the people to grow careless. When hunters strayed alone, the giants followed, their footsteps so heavy that the deer froze before bolting. Some hunters never returned. Others came back broken, whispering of a hand that wrapped around their chest like a cage, of a face that smelled of dust and ash, leaning close. These men did not last long. They wasted, as if the weight of stone lingered inside them, crushing their hearts by slow degrees. In Cherokee country, there is the tale of Nunyunui, the stone-clad man. His body was wrapped in rock so thick no weapon pierced it. He walked into villages without fear, demanding meat, demanding blood, demanding anything he wished. His skin was not his only armor. He could read thoughts, hear whispers before they were spoken. No trap could hold him, for he knew its shape before his foot touched ground. Yet he fell too, not to arrows or spears, but to cunning. The people lured him to water, weaving spells so the river itself rose up and swallowed him. His stone body sank, dragged down by its own weight, and never rose again. Yet the river still turns strange where they say he drowned, the current snagging, the water thick with silt, as if something huge shifts beneath. The plains people knew the truth. You could not fight stone with pride. Pride was brittle. Pride cracked. Only patience, only trickery, only fire set with purpose could save you. Children were taught this not as a tale, but as survival. They were shown where old pits still yawned under grass, filled with blackened stakes, and told, "This is where we stood against them. This is where stone bled smoke." And yet the giants endure in the land itself. Travelers hear their laughter in the roll of distant thunder. Hunters see their backs in the cliffs that line the rivers, hunched as though waiting to rise. Even mountains take their shape, the broad shoulders, the tilted heads, giants who lay down and never got up again. The earth, some say, still remembers their weight and holds their outlines as warning. On nights when the prairie burns, when lightning sets the grass seas aflame and the sky glows red with fury, the old people say the stone giants walk again. You cannot see them through the smoke, but you hear the cracking, the booming of rock under heat, and you know. They stride where the fire clears paths, feeding on the panic of fleeing herds, drinking the light of burning trees. The next morning, when the air still smells of ash, you may find footprints too deep to fill with rain, their edges fused like glass. Proof that stone remembers fire, and fire remembers stone. So the stories continue, traveling on the wind, on the lips of grandmothers, on the pages of rock faces carved by storms. They remind each generation, stone is not dead, it sleeps. And when it wakes, it does not forgive. There is no forgiveness in the desert. Its ledger is written in bone and salt, its winds stripping the foolish and guarding the wise. Daylight burns until it rattles in your teeth, and night drops so quickly the stars seem to fall like sparks from a forge too far above to reach. In that harsh arithmetic, heat by day, cold by night, thirst always, the old people whisper of giants whose hair ran like copper fire and whose teeth worked patient as flint. They lived where caves breathe, where stone remembers flame, where water is a rumor carried in a gourd. They come thin seasons. They come when lizards move like knives across the sand, and the wind tastes of old pottery. You hear them first in the gullies, where sound goes to be sharpened, a loose scree stone, a long breath threaded with dust, a low voice not made for speech but for hunger. The children know the rules then, no wandering from the shade, no chasing the sleek blue lizards, no collecting the glassy chips where the old ones struck tools, because the red-haired devourers are restless, and the mouths of their caves glint like teeth. At dusk, the mesas bleed their heat back into the air, and the color drains from everything but the giant's hair. You can see it from far off, a burnished braid over shoulder blades like quarried slabs, a rust halo in the last light, moving with a slowness that is not laziness, but certainty. They do not hide. Why would they? A shadow that size is a law. They step from the mouths of canyons with sand whispering around their ankles and look down at the people as a falcon looks down at mice, and for a heartbeat the desert seems to hold its breath and count. They are not stone like the plains giants, not ribbed with famine like the winter hunger out east. These are flesh and heat and blood, broad across the chest, long in the arms, their bellies do not hollow. They are lined like water gourds. Their mouths, this is what the grandmothers say, voice rough with dry years, are made for meat taken hot. When they smile, the gums show black where the desert has painted them. When they laugh, the caves answer, because the caves have learned that echo from long practice. The first raid always comes like a lesson you should already have known. The people are camped by a river that tries to be river, thin as a silver wire under cottonwoods that have forgiven too much wind. Nets tremble in the shallows. Fish flicker like loose coins. Women kneel and wash the dust out of children's hair. Men watch the ridges without appearing to. The sky turns that particular copper that means the day is being smelted down into night. Then something blocks a slice of the sun where the canyon opens, and all the color runs into that shape's hair. Dogs do not bark. Birds do not warn. They vanish into green that suddenly looks too flimsy to hold them. The giants walk out with dust walking behind them. They smell of old heat and a sweetness like singed mesquite. They do not rush. Rushing is for the fearful. They are as patient as dunes. One lifts a net from the water with 2 fingers, watching the fish slap against his wrist the way rain drums a roof. He eats one alive. The child who sees it bites her own hand to stop the sound she feels building in her throat, a sound that would call them all. She tastes iron and does not swallow. Another giant reaches for a goat, lazy, tender-footed, bell around its neck, a foolishly bright music. And when his hand closes, he does it with the care of someone who values tools. Nothing spills. There are always bargains before there is battle. The old ones step forward with bowls held in both hands, with flatbread still breathing heat, with a strip of dried venison oiled and sprinkled with salt precious enough to hurt to offer. The giants take everything without thanks, and why should they thank? The desert thanks no one. If a hand hesitates, if an eye lifts too high, if a mother cannot stop herself from glancing toward the cave where the last of the water jars sleep, then the red hair dims for a moment as a head tilts, and a finger as long as a child's forearm lifts to point, and the people remember they are not negotiating, but surviving. Night comes. It brings a cold like honesty. Fires burn small and careful because flame travels in these parts. And when it travels, it writes its name on cliffs and makes the sky read it aloud. Drums do not sound. Songs make poor shields here. Instead, there is the work of hands, the binding of thorn into ropes, the smearing of resin across dry brush, the pleating of green boughs to make smoke that will bite into a giant's throat. Quiet, deft, ashamed of the noise of their own breath, the people map the ground with their fear. The mouths of the giant's cave stare down. They are not accidents, these openings. They look like choices the mountain made. In the day they hold heat like old grudges. At night they exhale the sun back, a soft furnace breath that makes lizards smile in their sleep. From within comes the slow cuff drag of feet that have no reason to hurry, the rasp of hair against stone, a murmur that is not language but agreement. Sometimes a bone rolls to the lip and taps, taps, as if asking to be let in again. A woman whose son did not come back from the last red season stands with a torch the length of her sorrow and does not weep. A man who has counted goats all his life stands with a jar of pitch heavy enough to break a wrist and does not think of counting now. Children carry baskets of sage and juniper. The smell wraps around them like a gentler night. The plan is not complicated. Cunning does not need to be pretty to work. They wait for the hair to show, for that first ember of a head rising from the cave like a promise of heat. When it appears, they move as one body. The body a village becomes when the wind is wrong, when the well is low, when the tall shadows return. Thorn ropes drop and catch around ankles huge as water jars. Pitch leaps and clings. Smoke goes in and does not want to come out. Fire finally remembers it is older than any hunger. It crawls along resin lanes. It climbs the dry ribs of brush. It licks. It speaks in the only tongue that makes giants step backward. The cave inhales from habit. This is where it makes its mistake. The flames rush inward as if welcomed. What had been mouths become chimneys. The red hair catches with a sound like a hawk's screech drawn long. The first cry shakes dust from ledges. Bats pour out like ash alive. The people hold the ropes and do not let go. Hands blister. Eyelashes singe. Someone begins to sing after all. Not a song of pride, but the low workman's chant that keeps muscles moving when they would rather tremble. Giants stumble. One falls to his knees, and the ground feels it. Smoke wraps his head like a crown and pushes down. Teeth flash. The bite finds nothing but air hot enough to scald the tongue. Another reels deeper into the fire's throat, disappears, returns half-burned, howls a word no human ever taught him. The cave keeps taking. The cave has taken for ages. Tonight it takes its own. Not all fall. Some turn, dragging ropes that cut trenches, bursting through thorn that tries to remember it was once green. A handful flee into the night, hair streaming, shoulders bright as smouldering stumps. The people do not follow. They have learned the desert's law. Distance is mercy, and mercy is sometimes the difference between living long enough to carry water at dawn and being a story someone else must finish for you. When the fire gutters, there is a quiet too loud to bear. The caves exhale black. The stars have come nearer, soot-kneed, curious. The woman with the torch lets it go out in the sand and kneels. She touches the ground, palm flat, and the old rock under her skin seems to hum. Perhaps it is only the blood in her hand. Perhaps it is the mountain remembering the weight it carried tonight. At first light, the smoke is blue, and the cliffs are pink, and the children are not allowed up the talus. The men climb anyway, slow, with the small deliberate steps desert stone demands. Inside is a city unbuilt. Shelves of old ash, ribs of charcoal, a ceiling written with centuries of smoke. Bones lie in tide lines, sorted by collapse. Skull plates like cracked bowls. Femurs black as creekbed logs after flood. Teeth that look like river pebbles and are not. There is hair fused to rock in long, glossy smears that catch the sun and mock it. No trophies are taken. The desert dislikes greed. The people bow their heads to a place that is now a grave. They seal the mouth, not with a door. Doors belong to houses, but with stone dragged and coaxed until the opening resembles a wound that has scabbed over. They sing then, this once, not to praise and not to boast, but to place a marker in the air. Here we stood together. Here the fire agreed with us. Here the red-haired hunger went quiet. The song is simple, almost a hum. The canyon keeps it and gives it back in pieces all afternoon, a kindness the desert rarely offers. By evening, the wind has cleaned the ground of footprints larger than memory. The cottonwoods lift their green like a benediction. Nets go back into water because living insists on itself. Goats wander out and stare at the sealed stone as goats stare at everything, wise with stupidity. Mothers tell children again the rules they already know. Fathers pare thorns and lay them where old paths invite new mistakes. The sun bleeds down. The caves keep their breath to themselves. But the desert does not forget, and neither do the people. They carry the smell in their hair for weeks, the braided smoke of sage and pitch, and something else they do not name. When the wind comes from the canyons, it brings a taste like overcooked meat. When a child asks what the stain on the cliff is, the grandmother says, "Old fire," and does not say whose. At night, a few of the men wake because they dreamt of copper shining in dark air, and a hand closing over their ribs with a tenderness that had nothing to do with love. The story walks with them after that, a tall shadow that throws shade at the hottest hour. It says, caves remember. It says, fire settles its accounts. It says, when the red-haired ones come again, and they will, because hunger is older than memory, you will be ready, or you will be counted. The desert keeps score. The desert forgives nothing, and in the deep silence between the last bat's wing and the first star's blink, you can almost hear the sealed cave sigh, as if a long mouth has decided, for now, to sleep. The fire in the caves had been meant to end them. Smoke poured in, ash blackened the ceiling, and the giants howled as their hair kindled like torches. The people sang, not in triumph, but in grim defiance, voices hoarse with sage smoke. They sealed the mouths with stone and dirt, swearing the desert would never again birth such hunger. Yet stories linger because silence never lasts. And the desert, more than any land, knows how to keep old wounds warm beneath its sand. The Paiute call them Si-Te-Cah, eaters of men, giants whose hair gleamed the color of flame in the dusk. They were not strangers, not spirits half-dreamed, but neighbors, terrible, ravenous, always waiting. Camps vanished, herds thinned, children disappeared like coins dropped into dark water. Their laughter was said to travel on wind, a low booming that made even the coyotes flatten to the dirt. The tribes fought them for generations. They fought them with arrows, with spears, with fire, with unity. The giants retreated only to strike again, dragging the desert's silence with them. It is told that the last of them took refuge in a cavern near the dry lake beds. The people gathered in a circle of resolve, many nations together. Flames in their hands, smoke in their throats, they drove the Si-Te-Cah inward, deeper, until the caves themselves seemed to choke. Arrows rattled, stones were rolled, brushwood heaped high at the entrance. Then they lit it, and the desert inhaled. The fire thundered like a living god, and the giants screamed, first with rage, then with fear, finally with silence. When the fire died, the people rolled more stone across the mouth, sealing it forever. They turned their backs and walked away, carrying the sound in their bones. But deserts do not forget. They hold memory in their hollows. Centuries later, settlers wandering the Nevada dust swore they found bones too long for men, skulls with jaws made for tearing. In the caves, they said, tufts of red hair clung to stone as if refusing to burn. The old stories flared again, carried on paper instead of wind, retold in voices that did not know their age. The tribes never needed such proof. Proof is what you demand when you have forgotten fear. The people remembered well enough. They avoided certain gullies, never camped where the cliffs leaned too close, always left gifts of food at the mouths of caves, not because they believed the giants still lived, but because they knew hunger never dies. It only sleeps. Even now, at dusk, when the cliffs of Nevada bleed red and the shadows stretch long across the sand, you can imagine them rising. Hair like copper coals, teeth glinting, arms long enough to pull a goat from a pen without bending. You can hear the crunch of bone between stone teeth, the heavy breath that smells of smoke and old blood. You can feel the desert waiting, its silence stretched taut as a drumhead, ready for one last scream to shiver across the dunes. The Si-Te-Cah are gone, yes, burned, buried, sealed in rock. But every tribe that fought them carries a scar in its stories. Every cave mouth still yawns wide like a wound. Every red stone in the desert shines a little too brightly at sunset, as if remembering a hair that caught fire and burned without ash. The desert forgives nothing. The desert keeps its accounts in blood. And when the wind pushes across the dry lake beds and moans through the sealed caves, those who know the stories do not call it wind. They bow their heads, whisper old warnings, and listen to the Si-Te-Cah turning in their graves of stone. No country could claim the giants as its own. Their shadows stretched from the cold forests of the northeast to the storm-soaked ridges of the south, from rivers that whispered under ice to mountains that groaned beneath summer heat. Each nation had its name, its shape, its caution. Together, they painted a continent thick with enormous presences. In the longhouse fires of the Iroquois, tales rose of the stone giants. Not the same as the Sioux remembered, but kin to them. These were hunters who covered their bodies in rock armor, their clubs heavy enough to turn men to pulp. They stalked villages for meat, and their laughter cracked like frost. Yet they could be tricked. The elders spoke of luring one into the river, weighting his stone flesh until the current dragged him down, his bellow muffled to bubbles. On quiet nights, the river still roils as if something moves beneath, angry that it was forced to bow. Far to the south, the Cherokee spoke of Nunyunui, the stone-clad man. His hide was impervious, his hunger indiscriminate. Worse, he could read thoughts. No ambush could surprise him. Villagers whispered of his red eyes flashing through the dark, of his feet leaving scorched prints where no fire burned. In the end, it was not arrow nor spear that ended him, but cunning. He was led into the river, and the water pulled him under. The people say the stones at the bottom of that stream still hold the heat of his skin, centuries later. On the Pacific coast, other names stirred the air. The Lummi spoke of Tsemequis, tall, hair-covered beings who came from the forests to raid for food, or for children. Their stories shifted with each family line. Sometimes the giants were brutish, tearing fish from nets. Sometimes they were cunning, waiting for the dark to slip into camps. Parents hushed children by warning of the Si-Te-Cah, nocturnal giants whose names were dangerous even to speak lest they hear and come. The northwest coast tribes marked cliffs with carvings, painted masks with stretched mouths, carved totems with towering figures whose eyes bulged wide. These were not ornaments. They were warnings. Do not wander into the timber. Do not whistle at night. Do not invite the tall one's attention. And in the rolling mountains of the Appalachians, the Cherokee remembered the Tzul'Kalu', the slant-eyed giant, master of the wild places. His home was in the high ridges, his strength beyond measure. Hunters swore his footprints spanned rivers, that his gaze could shatter courage. He was feared but also revered, as if the land itself had chosen him as its voice. Some said he was not holy enemy but guardian, terrible in his power, but bound to his mountains like a root to its soil. So many names, so many shadows. Nunyunuwi, Genosqua, Tsemeques, Tzul'Kalu', always towering, always more than human, always watching from the edge of firelight. The pattern never changes. They arrive from the timber, from the ridges, from the caves. They take what they want. They leave silence. And always, the people answer with fire, with cunning, with unity. Alone, no hunter survives. Together, the tribes find ways to drive them back. That is the true heart of the tales. Giants are not just warnings of danger. They are reminders that survival belongs to the many, not the lone. Even now, rivers cut channels that look like footprints too broad for men. Mountains rise with shoulders bent, as if frozen mid-step. The forests murmur with echoes that could be wind or breath. The old names cling stubbornly to stone and water. And when the night presses too close, when the woods grow too still, when the hair at the nape stirs without reason, the stories return unbidden. The giants may be gone, but the land remembers. The old ones say the giants did not fade quietly. They were not creatures to slip away like smoke. They were storms, and storms end only with wreckage. When the people speak of their vanishing, they do not tell of a single night, a single fire, a single triumph. They tell of wars stretched across winters, across plains and deserts and rivers, until the land itself became scarred with the memory of struggle. One tale begins in the high country, where cliffs knife the sky and valleys hold echoes like water. Here the stone giants still prowled, their skin glinting, their laughter striking sparks in the dark. The people gathered, not one village but many, a coalition born from desperation. They dug pits deep as graves and lined them with sharpened poles. They carried fire not in handfuls of coal, but in great torches bound with resin, so the night shone with an angry red glow. The giants came down as they always did, certain that no hand of flesh could harm stone. Their steps shook dust from the cliffs. Their shadows fell long across the assembled warriors. But this time, the earth itself betrayed them. The pits swallowed the first of them whole. The sharpened stakes split his stone skin, and when he bellowed, the warriors threw fire until the pit became a furnace. His roar rang across valleys, rattled teeth, woke birds into frantic flight. By dawn, the only proof he had lived was a scatter of cracked rock and smoke rising from the earth. Other giants fled, but they could not outrun unity. Tribe after tribe joined, spreading signals with smoke and song, until whole valleys burned with torches. Where giants had hunted, men now hunted them. Fires lit canyon mouths. Spears rained from ridges. Drums beat in rhythms older than war, a reminder that the people had not forgotten how to stand together. Slowly, painfully, the giants' dominion waned. Another story winds through the desert. The Si-Te-Cah, red-haired devourers, had already been sealed in caves once, burned until their screams turned stone black. But some survived, scattered bands that crept from hidden lairs and raided where they could. One such band haunted a dry lake, dragging children into the salt flats, leaving bones gnawed to splinters. The Paiute and their neighbors gathered for the last hunt. They piled brush high, ringed the caves with fire, and drove the giants inward again. This time, they sealed not just the mouths, but the entire cliffs, rolling stone until the desert swallowed the caves whole. The people turned their backs and left, but they carried the memory, hair catching like flame, voices bellowing like thunder in a narrow place, the desert holding its silence until the last echo died. In the forests of the east, the Gunosqua were hunted by cunning. The Iroquois tale of warriors who lured one into a gorge with bait of meat and fire. When he bent to seize it, they loosed a hail of burning arrows, each tipped with resin, each trailing sparks. His stone-plated skin cracked under the onslaught, and when he fell, the gorge trembled. They buried him where he lay, piling rocks until the mound itself looked like the hump of a sleeping beast. To this day, the hill is avoided. Travelers swear the ground still rumbles if you stand there too long. The Cherokee say the Nununuwi fell differently. His power lay not only in stone armor, but in his ability to read thoughts, to know plans before they were acted. The people turned to ritual. They masked their minds with chants, repeated nonsense syllables until even they no longer knew which way their plans bent. When at last they lured him to the river, it was not with trickery he could anticipate, but with confusion he could not pierce. He stepped into the current, and the water rose higher, faster, until his stone-weighted body dragged him down. His red eyes flared once, twice, then went dark beneath the foam. Each region tells the same ending with different words: fire, water, unity. No arrow, no spear, no single warrior ever claimed the death of a giant. They were too vast, too old, too cunning. Only together could the people break them. Only by turning the land itself into a weapon. The pits, the rivers, the caves, the flames. But victory was never clean. For every giant who fell, others escaped into wilderness too broad to patrol. Some vanished into mountains, into caverns deeper than fire could reach. Some, the elders say, walked into the sea, their heads still above water far from shore, until the horizon swallowed them. Others shrank, not in body, but in presence, slipping into shadows, no longer hunting openly but watching from the tree line, waiting for a chance. By the end, the people no longer spoke of giants as rulers, but as remnants. The world had grown narrower for them. They had been driven out, burned, drowned, broken, yet the land still bore their scars, cracked boulders said to be bones, cairns that marked their graves, river bends that twisted unnaturally where a giant had drowned. The people survived, but they knew survival did not mean safety. The old women whisper, "Nothing that old dies easy." The last battles were not victories alone, they were also bargains. Some stories tell of tribes who captured a giant but did not kill it. Instead, they offered terms: leave this valley, leave our children, leave our hunts, and we will let you go. The giant, beaten but unbroken, would agree, and so he would stride away into the wilderness, carrying his hunger to some other land. Did he keep his word? The stories never say. But the fact that they were told at all is warning enough. Sometimes survival meant letting the monster live, so long as it lived elsewhere. Other tales are stranger still. The Pacific coast remembers hairy ones who were not wholly enemy. They stole food, yes, but sometimes they gave gifts in return. Piles of fish left by the river, twisted branches arranged in patterns only they understood. They were giants. Yes, but not always cannibals. Not always cruel. Perhaps they were the last fragments of the older kind, softened by years of hiding. Perhaps they were something else entirely. The people did not press the question. It was enough to know they were near and to keep the rules. Leave food. Do not whistle. Do not mock their tracks. The vanishing of the giants is never told as an ending. It is a retreat. Fire and unity pushed them back, yes. Rivers pulled them under. Caves became their tombs. But the people do not say they are gone. They say they went away, into the high ridges, into the ocean, into the deep forests where human fires do not reach. The land itself may have claimed them, folding them back into stone and river and tree, disguising them as hills and cliffs and shadows. And yet, every few generations, someone sees too much. A hunter finds a footprint in fresh snow, wide as a shield, too deep for any man. A woman wakes to a smell of ash and meat outside her door, and in the morning, the stump where she leaves offerings is bare. A child wanders too far and returns babbling of a tall figure who walked beside him silently, herding him home without word or touch. These are not new stories. They are the same old ones, dressed in fresh years. The people remember. They remember in whispers, in dances, in the shapes carved into totems and painted on rock. They remember in silence too, in the valleys they will not cross, in the caves they seal with stone, in the words they refuse to say aloud. The giants have vanished, but they have not died. They are stitched into the land, into the air, into the hunger that comes when winter is long or when greed runs hot. And when the fire burns low, when the wind rattles the lodge walls, when the night presses too close, the refrain returns. The giants are gone. The giants are not gone. The land remembers, and so must we. There is more quiet in the land now. Rivers flow where they belong. Forests stretch unbroken by any roar, and the mountains sink deeper into their rest. The giants have gone, the old ones say. They were burned in their caves, drowned in rivers, buried beneath cairns of their own breaking. Their time ended when men united, when fire and cunning pushed back the impossible. And yet, listen closely. The silence is never complete. In the northwest, the trees knit themselves so thick that day feels like twilight. Fog drapes the ridges like skin. It is here that the whispers continue. Hunters tell of footprints pressed deep into moss, longer than a man's arm. Women say they hear wood knocking, steady, deliberate, as if something beyond the tree line hammers its presence into the world. Sometimes stones arc through the air, too heavy for a human hand, landing just close enough to warn. They do not call it windigo here, nor stone giant, nor Si-Te-Cah. The names have shifted, braided with new tongues, carried on the breath of newcomers who brought their own wild man of the woods. The word that settled into the valley was Sasquatch, later twisted into Sasquatch. And so, a new mask slid over the old face. Painted rock tells the story without words. On the cliffs of California, the Yokuts carved a figure with arms wide and hair flowing, the hairy man, Datat. His body looms over smaller forms, wife, child, a family etched into stone 1,000 years ago. To look upon it is to feel the weight of size, the tenderness of presence. The Yokuts say he was both warning and protector, fierce when angered, but good, for he devoured beasts that might harm the people. Parents told their children not to stray by the river at night, not because the hairy man was only hunger, but because he was power, unpredictable, enormous. In the smoky timber of British Columbia, stories lived in the mouths of the Senseiles people. They spoke of a tribe of hairy beings, mountain dwellers, cave sleepers. Sometimes they stole salmon, sometimes they carried away the unwary. Always they reminded the people that the forests were not empty. When J.W. Burns, a government agent, heard these tales in the early 20th century, he carried them into the white man's language, naming the beings Sasquatch. But long before ink touched paper, the stories had lived in firelight, carried from elder to child like coals in a pouch. nor are the echoes bound only to the northwest. Across the Appalachians, the Cherokee told of Tzul'kalu', slant-eyed giant of the ridges. In Alaska, the Alutiiq feared Nantinak, whose presence could empty a village. The Lummi warned of Tsemeques, and in the Mississippi forests, priests recorded tales of hairy beings who screamed in the night. Even Spanish explorers, wandering far from their own saints, wrote of los vigilantes oscuros, dark watchers who circled camps after sundown. Different tongues, different lands. But the figure remains, a towering, hair-clad being, neither beast nor man, watching from the edge of sight. The stories tell of habits too. They speak of the watchers throwing stones to mark their ground. They speak of wood struck against wood, a language of knocks no man can quite decode. They speak of deer carcasses pulled into trees, of salmon stolen from nets, of camps robbed of meat but left otherwise untouched, as if the intruder cared little for anything but flesh. Sometimes they speak of gifts, a fish head left on a stump in exchange for berries, a pile of stones stacked with care where food had vanished. These small mysteries weave themselves into the greater shadow, until the line between theft and communion blurs. The elders know what this means. The giants did not die. They changed. They softened in memory. Their teeth dulled, their hunger less cruel. Once they were cannibals, marauders, devourers of whole tribes. Now they are glimpsed as watchers, thieves, sometimes guardians. The land will not let them vanish entirely. It remakes them in each generation's image. By the mid-century, white settlers gave the name Bigfoot. The word was born of tracks found in California mud, prints too broad, too deep. The newspapers laughed, then wondered, then spread the tale until Bigfoot became the giant everyone thought they already knew. But for the people who had always lived in the forests, Bigfoot was not invention. He was simply the latest mask. Behind him stood the hairy man, the Tzul'kalu', the Genosqua, the Tsemeques, the Nunyunutwi. Behind him stood the very first giants, burned in caves, drowned in rivers, yet still restless beneath the soil. On certain nights, when the fog holds tight to the trees, when the moon hides its face, when every bird falls silent at once, the old refrain whispers again, "They are gone. They are not gone." The land remembers, and so must we. The story does not end with the sealing of caves, or the drowning of stone-clad bodies, or the last scream of red-haired devourers. The story walks on. It walks in the same forests, breath steaming in the same cold air, footprints pressing into the same soil. Only the names change. Settlers brought their own shadows across the sea. Wild men of the woods, figures whispered of in Europe, naked and hairy, wandering on the edges of farms and forests. When they came to this continent, those old fears recognized the giants already here. The two stories merged, like rivers finding one channel. The result was something both ancient and new. The hairy man, the Sasquatch, the Bigfoot. Even today, painted rock holds its vigil. The hairy man stares from the cliff wall, arms wide as if to shield or seize. His family stands with him, sketched into stone by hands long dust. Children who visit are warned not to linger too near, for the hairy man still walks by rivers at night. His breath is the fog that clings to reeds. His shadow is the shape that blocks the stars for just a moment before moving on. The Si-Te-Cah's people too keep their memory. They tell of Sasquatch, not monster, not myth, but other tribe. A people who live in mountains and caves, who step into villages when hunger presses, who leave when the forest calls. When asked if Sasquatch exists, their answer is simple: they have always been here. And so the modern tales layer themselves upon the old. Hunters in Washington hear wood knocks in the night and return home pale. Fishermen in British Columbia find nets torn apart, the salmon gone, the water thick with a smell not of fish, but of musk. Campers in Oregon wake to the sound of heavy breathing outside their tents. their fires scattered, their food missing, but their bodies left untouched. The refrain continues. They are not gone. Elsewhere, other names rise. The skunk ape in Florida swamps, the grassman in Ohio fields, the Fook monster in Arkansas woods. Each new land invents a name, but behind the names is the same old figure, taller than any man, hairy as the wild, walking with a slow certainty that says, "This world is still mine, no matter how many roads you cut through it." Bigfoot has grown gentler in memory than the giants of old. The windigo tore flesh, the stone giants crushed bone, the Si-Te-Cah gnawed children's bones to dust. Bigfoot is more often watcher than eater, more often mystery than terror. But gentleness does not mean safety. Stories linger of figures throwing stones at cabins, of hunters found broken in lonely clearings, of screams that freeze the blood and leave no throat to blame. Perhaps the land, weary of the worst hungers, reshaped its memory into something less cruel. Perhaps the people, needing a giant still but no longer able to bear the old terrors, painted the monster in softer hues. Or perhaps Bigfoot is only the latest mask. Behind it, the same hunger waits, patient, ready to bare its teeth again when the world grows lean. Listen, in some valleys, they say, the giant's bones still surface after floods, long femurs caught in mud, skulls broad as helmets. Listen, in some mountains, hikers vanish, their names lost to newsprint, their last footprints leading into thickets where no trail continues. Listen. In the stillness between owl calls, you may hear the knock of wood on wood, steady, deliberate, older than language. The giants are not gone. They have only learned new names. They have only stepped deeper into the forests, into the canyons, into the high ridges. They walk at the edges of light, where memory and shadow overlap. And so the circle closes. From windigo to stone giant, from Si-Te-Cah to hairy man, from Sasquatch to Bigfoot, the figure remains, larger than man, shaped like man, always hungry, always watching. The land remembers, and because it remembers, we must too. When the fire gutters low and the woods lean close, when silence thickens and footsteps echo where no one walks, repeat the old refrain. It is the only shield you have. They are gone. They are not gone. The land remembers, and so must we.